All right then. So, hello everybody, and welcome to planning your project for success. And I've actually sort of given it a subtitle of 10 ways to prevent failure, embarrassment, and reputation loss. Now, why am I saying that? Is because over the years that I've been active, I can assure you that I have come across some serious situations, not directly involving me, but because I was in a role that was exposed to situations where there was project failure, there was an embarrassment to the people concerned, and there was a loss of reputation. So I'm going to go through that. I'm going to go through and just probably allude to it in a little bit more detail as I'm going along. But the idea of this is to actually show you that it's the key to all of this is to make sure you've got some good planning happening up front. Okay, so I want you to think about this. Have you ever had a project that just didn't work, that went wrong, that was it was something that you just don't want to remember, talk about, or think about? Well, I'll give you my story. It's a story where I actually turned a project around that was going drastically wrong. And it was a project where it was a multi-million-pound project. It was many years ago. This was back in the UK, hence pounds, not dollars. And what happened was that the application had been put together from a consortium of organizations. Okay, somebody on behalf of a consortium. So this is where the embarrassment comes into it. And basically, they put the application together. It was like a sort of like it was multi-million. So they were looking big picture. So there was no actual planning of the detail. And what happened then was that they also technically wrote it on the back of an envelope. In other words, it was sketched together very quickly. And the application went in, and because of the reputation of the businesses involved in the consortium, of course, it got a very good sort of following from the funder who funded this project. I come along because they were looking for staff. And I remember going for the interview and people ringing me up and saying, if you get offered the position, don't accept it because you'll end up with egg on your face. Well, of course, that meant that I was going to accept the position because I like to challenge. And it was interesting because when I was applying for the job, I was 1, 2, 3, 4th in the hierarchy. When I started the job, I was 3rd. And within 2 months, there was just me and the CEO left. And she went. And as part of that process, she actually also rolled the board. So it was really one of those situations where it was really, really sort of the partners were not, gelling together. They were walking away sort of with that look of embarrassment, not wanting to be connected. And I had to work to get 10 organizations working together. Where it started with actually only 3 of them were willing to work together. So I went through this whole process of building the whole project up. And by the time I left the country, 18 months later, 8 of the 10 were back fully engaged. So I know what it's like to be in a project that's going so drastically wrong. So this is what I want to share with you. I ran the multi-million-dollar project. I got it back up on its feet again. I've been experienced in managing multiple projects at the same time. I used to organize conferences and workshops. We had 81 training days a year back in the UK. Over in Australia, my government position, one day, my boss one year sort of did for a report for a conference, and we were running 25 projects at the same time. How, I don't know, but we did. I've delivered project management training in Australia and the UK. and I've authored project management resource manuals for not-for-profits and small businesses. Okay, so let's start with planning your project for success. Well, first of all, it must have a project that's successful has got its run. It's a project that runs within budget, it runs on time, and it runs to the specification. So that's the quality. That's what I call the golden triangle. If you can get those three areas planned and working right from the start, with people being integral to the process. So, you know, what can go wrong? Well, here are some examples. There could be delays. Some of these delays are unforeseen. I'm thinking of some construction infrastructure projects over the last few years, especially coming out of bushfire recovery and COVID restrictions. We found that the builders were and the tradies were running miles behind in their timing. And even today, although there's been a good catch up, it's there are still unforeseen delays. And when you're subject to a funder, for example, they need to have all their project or your projects finished by a certain timeline. So when you are planning your project, make sure that you do build in some time contingencies so that you're not planning to finish at the last possible minute, because that's going to cause embarrassment to everybody, but you plan to start earlier and build in some contingencies so that you keep the project running on time by being able to work in other areas. Key staff leave, that's a big one, especially when there's been no record keeping or insufficient record keeping. That one, I've, government role, I've had to go in and help set that whole program back up again. Conflict and misunderstandings, and a lot of this is down to poor communication, which we're going to cover. It could be that you've put together a project, but you haven't really actually investigated whether there's a real need for it. So you get the money together, on the resources together, you go out there, whether it's in a marketplace or in a community place, and guess what? Nobody's interested. It's not high priority. And there we go, we've got low priority. When I talk about low priority, I'm talking about low priority in the organization that you're working in. Just bear with me a minute. When there's low priority, it just means that you're not going to get supported when you need it. And again, that's been a feature of some of the projects that I've monitored, looking at, the organisation in the first place, and we'll go to the reasons why in a later slide. And then the project plan itself was unrealistic. And that's what happened in that situation I gave you about what happened when I went into a job, because the plan itself just wasn't real. And what we ended up having to do was to go back to the government office from where we got the funding with a proposal for an alternative plan. Now, the thing about this is, if you can sort that problem at the beginning of the process, everybody wins. Because if you are getting funding, wherever you're getting the funding from, nobody wants to give that funding back, or nobody wants to take that funding back because there's too much administration involved. So everybody's keen to make sure that everything works. So if you do find yourself landed with an activity or project or whatever that, as I said, in my case, seemed to have been put together on the back of an envelope, if you go to whoever is sponsoring you with a proposal that's well written and shows that you've actually planned, then you'll be looked upon favorably. So what are the consequences? This can be an expensive mistake. We promoted the programs from the European Union. Now, I haven't seen this in Australia, but the European Union would audit the projects afterwards, and they would literally go down to the 0.00 pence of an hour of the costings, especially for overheads, and how they work them out. And it wasn't unusual to hear about projects that had to hand back something like £500,000 or euros £500,000 because of a simple calculation mistake. That was expensive. There's projects where, again, to save face, they've found out towards the end that it didn't work right, or they hadn't done what they were meant to do, which is a big one. So they've had to go back, and it's cost, again, £500,000, or it could be dollars, but in this case it was pounds, to rectify a project from which they'd only got about £50,000. So it can be a very expensive mistake, especially if you've got a project that's front in the community or in the business marketplace. It can be seen to be quite expensive to correct the problem. Of course, that leads to embarrassment, and that's the situation I was talking about. A consortium of 10 organizations, all high profile, things didn't go right, embarrassment, withdrawing to the sidelines. And as I said, the egg in the face principle. Loss of reputation or status when things can go horribly wrong. It sort of just brings that sour taste, and a black mark for funding. And that's you will find that if you're applying for grants, for example, one of the criteria questions or one of the threshold questions is have we had problems with you in the past? Have you not met your contractual obligations, etc.? So that black mark for funding does exist if you're looking for funding from grants, for example, or wherever your resource is coming from. So it's important that you do, I mean, we're talking, big cases here, but it does actually happen right down to the small project. It's in everybody's interest that the projects work. Now, my boss used to say, and it's correct, there's no such thing as a failed project. It's just a project that didn't go the way you planned. Okay. So, look, there's 10 ways to prevent failure, embarrassment, and reputation loss that I'm going to go through. And what I'm going to do also is I've created a checklist which I can send out to everybody afterwards. So number one is to plan the project right from the start. So I gave you the example, don't do it on the back of an envelope. It wasn't literally, but it's that same principle of just doing it. This looks like a brilliant idea. Let's just put the proposal together. You've got to be clearly defined objective and outcomes. You do need to be clear about the need and the support out there from your marketplace, from your community base, from wherever. There needs to be support and evidence of need. You do need to detail your plan, align it to the time, budget, and resources that are available to you. Align to strategy, top-down support. This is where you get the low support in your business or organization, if you're in a corporate or wherever, or not-for-profit, or anywhere where there's a sort of a leadership structure, is that it's so easy for middle-level management to apply for grants, or it used to be so easy for them to apply for grants, get the money, and then the top of the organizations go, what's this for? This doesn't fit with our strategy. So always make sure, and it doesn't matter now in the funding sense, because when it comes to funding, legally, it's the top of the organization or who has authority to sign an application form is required to press the submit button. If that doesn't happen, it's the fault of the organization. So make sure it's aligned to strategy. Again, I have examples of, and this is what I found in the government job, is we had organizations we funded were chasing grants. We called it chasing the taxi, the yellow taxi that stopped. Everyone that stopped outside the door, they chased and chased and chased. What happened is they ended up working outside of their purpose. And what they should have been doing, their core business, was being distracted because resources were being pulled into this other project or projects which were not their core purpose. So that turned out to be a costly mistake. Make sure you've got the skills and experience, especially the project manager. That is the key position in any kind of brief or proposal, is to make sure that you can describe the ideal project manager. You may have a person in mind, it doesn't matter, it's the role that's funded. So you need to be able to assure or be assured that the person in that role has got the right skills and experience and the other technical roles, etc. Make sure you do your risk planning up front. And I've got to say that when it comes to putting applications together with clients, the risk plan is the one that they scratch their head over, because they just don't understand what a risk is. What is the risk that can happen? Oh, this isn't going to happen to us. But I can assure you the low risk turned out to have the highest impacts. You may say, okay, we've got this person who's been working with us for years, and we've done all these projects, and they're going to manage this for us. And you don't even consider that that person could leave, or could suddenly have an illness, or something else could happen. And so that when that happens, and especially if there hasn't been any good communication in place, or any sort of other project management monitoring, that could have a huge impact on the organization. The other thing about doing risk planning up front is that you will identify additional costs that you can, or activities that you can put into your plan that's going to help overcome or reduce a problem. For instance, we talked about low community support. Well, you could actually build into your project that you're going to do some promotion in the community, some marketing, for example. Yeah, make sure you've got the scope. What's in scope, what's not in scope? You know, what is the purpose, what's involved, what part of area of your business or organization is going to be involved in. Make sure that you don't end up with scope creep afterwards. You've got very, very clear lines of delineation. And this one, everybody's, well, I'll say everybody, Gantt charts people are familiar with, which is where you break down the tasks and then identify them by units, which could be days, weeks, or months, and put the crosses in the boxes. Another one, which is probably just as useful, probably more useful, is what's called a PERT. And there you can, if you do that properly, you can identify what we call the critical path, which is the long path, which is the longest path that must happen with dependents and dependencies, that you know you can't move from one task to another until this has been done. And if that becomes your critical path, and you can work around that. So if there are delays, you can see what other activities can be brought forward. It's a really good tool to use. And I would recommend that, so that you actually can identify and help keep costs lower, bring the timelines, make sure that you're using effective use of the time that's available. So that's a really good tool to use. So number one is plan the project right from the start. The second one here is include your stakeholders in the planning. Stakeholders could be your own, staff, volunteers. It could be partners, project partners outside there, and get them involved in putting together the plan of what you're going to do. I've found that when you do that, they actually are engaged in the process. If you don't do that, they don't know what's going on. They're on a different page. So if you bring them together, and they also bring with them different outlooks, different viewpoints, and you end up with a more rounded project plan. So bring them into the planning process, and you'll be rewarded with a project that's more likely to work, that's going to get buy-in from everybody. Okay, plan to keep everyone informed. Oh, this is a biggie. Especially when you've got different organizations working together, or different departments working together, it doesn't matter. When you've got different units, whatever those units may look like, and the assumptions are made, but the communication isn't happening on a regular basis, that's when misunderstandings happen, and that's when fallouts happen. That's when competition happens. That's when you end up with grievances. It's a big one. Just by putting a communication plan in, and from that communication plan, enacting it. So communication is going to be your internal players, your community or market players, business players, or it could be how you communicating to the outside as well, especially if you're working on a project that has implications for the community or the marketplace. You really want to keep people involved and supporting your activity. to do that, you must keep the communication working both ways. Number 4 is build clear boundaries. This is about people and resources. And again, I've seen examples of projects falling over because they don't know the limits of the roles of the people involved. There's going to be a top level. There has to be. That's the contract or the sponsor level. That's that level. That is governance. It does not mean you get involved in the day-to-day activities. There's going to be a project manager level, and there's going to be technical and administration and whatever. This is if you're talking a big project. If you are working with teams, make sure that each of the players knows what their role is and their reporting lines to and from. I've seen it when somebody's been disgruntled at a lower technical level and they've gone straight to the top of the tree to give their arguments because they know somebody on the board, and then the board's interfered. No, that is not right. You have to make sure that you are very clear about the levels of communication, the individual roles of responsibilities. If you're bringing in a steering group or a reference group, have terms of reference, have the clearly, and we've got samples in our project management manuals of what an MOU for terms of reference for a steering group could be, and the terms of reference for a reference group. A steering group has got more authority. It's usually aligned to the senior level of the business. A reference group is coming in from the marketplace or the community base. You're giving information, but they don't have any legal decision-making authority. So we have to be clear about that, because you have people on reference groups who think that they've got a solid involvement and therefore what they say goes. It's not true. If you're working with project partners, make sure there's an MOU in place. So again, clear lines of boundaries. Okay, number 5, so you have to be clear who's in control of what. Now, I've just been talking there. This is part of probably follow on from 4. Organizational governance, that's at the top level. They're very, very concerned about any agreements and how you operate within those agreements. They're formal agreements. There's a project control group. That's a term that's coming up a lot in larger infrastructure projects in the community space these days, where they want to see that there's a group of individuals or representatives from very senior sort of stakeholders. When you start talking lots and lots of money, they want to see that they've got the stakeholders are invested in this with their time and their sort of ability to help control how the project goes. The project manager is always key. Make sure they've got the right skills, that you've got regular reporting, because again, the example of the project manager leaves. If you build in, this is probably 101 when it comes to writing a risk plan. The project manager leaves, the impact may be high. What you do there is you build a regular monthly reporting, weekly reporting, blah 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 blah. So you build that as part of the process, so you're never going to be far behind as to what status the project is in. Doesn't matter these days. You've got the technology, the IT programs, so that should also help in being able to get a clear idea of what state the project has got to. And again, financial reporting, that's very important, because projects can just blow out because nobody is being closely monitoring the budget. Also make sure that there's a variance, if you can, in the budget. The average at the moment is 15%, allow 15% for any unforeseen circumstances, especially if it's an infrastructure project. Okay, number 6, you have to manage risk. As I said, I have been working with people who've not been comfortable with the risk plan because they've not really known what the risks could be. So I would say build in a risk plan before you do anything, but I'm saying risk conscious, not risk averse. If you're risk averse, nothing gets done. If you're risk conscious, you're prepared to take those risks because you've put measures of mitigation in place. in the event they should happen. Thinking of a youth project many years ago, they didn't put a risk plan in place. They were taking people to seaside resorts in the UK because these were disengaged young people, hadn't been to the sea, hadn't seen the sea, but there was no control for them. And when they weren't actually in session, they just went rampaged around the town. Therefore, what happened there was it got into the national news. And it led to all those, the embarrassment. The funder was actually looking more closely at what they were doing, to letting people loose. And it actually spoilt it for the genuine youth projects who were using similar approaches. So making sure that the risk planning was probably more acute and more done in the future. So I'll just give you an idea of if you don't risk, this can happen. All right, 7 is evaluate and learn. I mean, we keep reinventing the wheel. We keep doing the same thing because we're not actually evaluating how successful, how the project has worked, and it sort of built it into our structures. So, I know there's like a cycle of, this is a great idea, we're going to do this project. They do the project, whatever they do, it ends up on the shelf. 5 years later, because staff have changed, people have changed, and oh, this would be a good idea, they're running the same thing again. You say you keep doing the same thing again, you get the same results. So and this has happened a few times. And I've seen it in a cycle. If you've been around long enough, you can see the cycles keep happening over and over again. So what do you do there? You analyze what went well and what could be improved and build it into your practices so that what has happened is going to change, because once change happens, you can't undo it. But if you just do a project, sideline it, and just put it on the shelf somewhere, of course, you're going to do it all over again because you've not built the change into your own systems. What have you learned from this project? Okay, distribute and monitor your finances. So make sure when you're doing this, make sure that you've got the project budget that you think about. Make sure you itemize it so that you're very, very clear. I have seen examples when they've itemized something right down to the kettle and the knives and forks in the kitchen. I don't mean that. And in fact, if you're applying for federal funding, they don't ask for the minute detail. They ask for the headings. But at the same time, you need to have done the minute detail in the background. So if you itemize the project budget, you've got a clearer idea. What you also do is you map those funding back to your project plan in detail. Is there going to be any top slicing? This is something I saw a lot in a former role where organizations we funded, and I could tell because I would go through the profit loss and the balance sheet just to have a look at the health of the organization. And it was very clear when there was a lot of top slicing. It's the costs that go towards, it can be overheads, but what they do is they tend to take away a certain percentage of the amount that you get funded from your budget. So 20% wasn't unusual. Now, taking that 20% actually can have implications on your ability to run your project. So just be mindful of that. I've also mentioned earlier that building a 15% variance, just in case that the budget is too tight or costs are going to go up. The time frame might be such that costs will go up. So monitor the true costs of activities. You get quotes, etc., for what you're doing. That's fine. Look at the return on investment. Monitor the return on investment and the return on effort. How much has this actually added to the bottom line? What difference has this, in putting this funding done to this? And then look at the regular reporting to the senior level. Make sure that the budget is continually monitored at that level because they're responsible. I don't mean micromanaging as such, but they need to be kept aware. And again, I've seen circumstances when there's been some shocks, quite simply because the figures have been distributed to senior level and those figures were just taken at the face level. But then when something happened, they were hiding a lot of things. So there's a balance between being able to monitor at the high level or getting too involved, but there has to be a middle line somewhere where you're able to monitor. So the treasurer, the finance officer, whatever, probably needs to have oversight of project budgets. Okay, stick to regulations and compliance requirements. There's no shortcuts here. Plan, if you know what those compliance requirements are going to be, those regulations, make sure you build them into your policies and procedures and your processes, and that you've communicated them to everybody involved in the project who will be affected by those. And I'm working with a client at the moment on looking at such regulations in privacy and information sharing and how that works with partners. So, you know, give everybody training and information and an evidence trail and build it into your quality management system. Make sure, because if you don't, again, that could be a cost of embarrassment, cost of loss of face, cost of rectification. There's lots that could happen there. Okay, and number 10 is ensure there's a readiness for change, because any project, any activity should lead to change somewhere. And if you don't have the buy-in from everybody who is going to be affected by that change, you're going to get a lot of problems down the line. I'm thinking of a project which was interesting because by the time we finished, I realized that we actually went through John Cotter's 8 steps for change plan, but we didn't know we had until afterwards. So basically make sure that there's some good solid consultation happening for that change so that people know if it's a change project. So if anybody's affected internally, that they know, or even externally, that they know that it's happening so they can have their opportunities to have their say. Make sure that you actually demonstrate the benefits. Otherwise, say if you put something negative, it becomes 10 times worse. Well, stop that and promote the benefits instead. Make sure you've got workshops and training sessions happening so that people have the skills for the change. Make sure that you build it into your continuous improvement process, your policies, your procedures, etc. Again, as I mentioned about the evaluation, make sure that change is embedded into the next step. And then look at the impacts on the internal and external environments, what change is going to mean for that. So always, if you are planning a project, always remember what is the final impact that's going to have on us, our resources, our people, etc. So I've said 10 ways to prevent failure, embarrassment, and reputation loss. So plan it right, include your stakeholders, plan to keep everyone informed, have clear boundaries, be clear about who is in control, manage the risk, evaluate and learn, look after your finances, stick to regulations and compliance, and make sure you're change ready. Okay, that's a lot to go through. I just want to say that I mentioned we've got some resources. We've got project management in a box, which is there for not-for-profits, but we've also got a small business version. It's a actual complete manual of templates, and I've just put a few down here. Things like project structure, definition of project lifecycle, feasibility, overview, governance, terms of reference, project team, internal reporting, communication, accountability, responsibility, scope, control, planning tools, budgets, resource plans, risk planning. We've got the lot. Project implementation, quality management, monitoring, milestone reporting. We've got them all here in a template format. And I found out today that it was a $97 manual, but we've had it on our website for $47 since our last offer. So what I'm saying to you is, if anybody's actually interested in this, just go to bit.ly.pmin a box, project management in a box, and then I'm actually going to take it down at the end of the week and put it back to its normal price, because we've got a whole new strategy coming. So if you're actually interested in looking at some of these tools, then go along to the PMIN box and have a look at that. So we can put it into the chat space as well. So I just want to alert you to that, because I am intending on taking it down. Okay, and putting it back to its original price. So I hope you enjoyed that. This is an information session, and next time we're going to talk about mission-led income generation, an explanation of mission-led income generation sources to help keep the doors open in tough times. It's not all about grants and tenders. There's other ways to generate income. That's what we're going to be focusing on next time.